Hey, Howell here. What I want to do today is a talk entitled "The Far Right: A Meaningless Term," and the subtitle would be "My View, Perception on the Political Spectrum, the Continuum from Left and Right," because it's not possible to elucidate why the term "far right" is meaningless unless you put it in context, a greater context of this spectrum. And so on the left wing, I would have the two forms of socialism, which would be communism and National Socialism. And so the difference between them is one is international and the other is national. So international communism, it's very progressive. It's based on a revolution. It seeks to destroy the culture that came before it, and the heritage and the values. It's very, it's a clean sweep. It moves in on the aristocracy, on the ruling class, and it's very much against the individuality, individualism, in favour of the collective, and very much the state. Now, Richard Wolff talked about how why this Marx never mentioned the state. Now, Richard Wolff is an American economist, Marxist economist, and he, it's there in the 10 Planks and it's there in the Communist Manifesto, but very much the idea for me is that the state, you're so brainwashed, you're so indoctrinated into statism that eventually it becomes obsolete, or the state that we know today, it becomes obsolete. And that's the true meaning of the obsolete state within communism. And then also, what's really important, obviously, you got the owners and means of production, blah, 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 blah. But it's about undermining borders, open borders, at least within the Soviet Union. And the long-term goal would be the whole of the planet. It would be one culture. It would be one revolution. There would be no individual countries. There'd be one nation. Remember that nation means people. It means folk. And there is a difference between nation and state. And so, and it's very altruistic. It's very altruistic. And then the other aspect of socialism on the left would be National Socialism, which seeks to protect. It's very progressive in one respect, but on the other hand, it tries to protect the cultural values and the heritage and the history of that particular country. The best example, obviously, is the Nazis. Now, remember, the Nazis didn't call themselves Nazis. That was a derogatory term coined by the Allies. Nazi, National Socialism, that's where it comes from. It's very much strict borders, very strict immigration policies about protecting the folk, protecting the people, protecting the nation, and protecting the ancestral heritage of Germany. Obviously, that's why they wanted the Jews out. That's why they wanted the gypsies out. So they didn't want them mixing with the gene pool. And of course, the rest is history, as we know, unfortunately. Now, I'm a huge Hitler skeptic, along with Bormann. I don't believe he was a true National Socialist at all. But there were Nazis below him that were. Now, the similarities are obviously statism, a belief in the state. And I'm sure that in National Socialism, the state would always be there as some kind of existential external reality. And also a strong belief in socialism. Free education and free healthcare, because we want to control the education and we want to control your health to a certain degree, and it's in their interest to have a healthy nation, to work and educated, but not too educated, and educated in the way that we want you to be educated. and it's based on high taxes, very altruistic. Remember, I did mention fascism to begin with, because let me just remember, first of all, that National Socialism is influenced by, comes from the German Workers' Party under Anton Drexler, a long time before Hitler came to power in 1933. And they were very much the political wing. And if you look into the German Workers' Party, it's like a who's who of the Nazi Party. And then on the other side, there was the spiritual wing of it all, which was the Tahul Society, which was pagan to a large extent, and it was about finding the spiritual roots, the pagan spiritual roots of Germany. I'm aware that Germany is a recent name, a recent country, but that part of the world, anyway, that part of the world, and then fascism. You remember that Mussolini and Margherita Sarfatti come from a far left background. Now, Margherita Sarfatti, she was the one that coined the word fascism, and she wrote a book called "It Was All My Fault" or "All My Mistakes." It never. I tried to look for it. I couldn't find a copy in English, but it was Mussolini's, and his contemporaries that sort of dropped, I believe, temporarily, the idea of socialism, believing that what Italy needed before was like a clean sweep. But again, it's like the future would be free education, free healthcare, because we want to control the education. The state controls everything. It's very state intensive. It's just that in fascism there tends to be a respect for the ruling elite and some kind of respect for the cultural heritage of that country. Now, on the right, then, there must be an opposite to this statism. There must be an opposite to this socialism, and that must be libertarian. So that again, I would divide this into two aspects. I would have those who believe in the minimal role of government. So it'd be like the founding fathers of America, of the American Revolution. And then I would have on the far right, and is it worth using that term because it's just so overused and abused, would be anarchic libertarianism, an anarchy, no against rulers, no rulers. Remember, anarchy doesn't mean burning skips and buildings and God knows rioting left, right and centre. That's not what the word means. I have heard the term anarchic communist, which is, it's just nonsense. If you ever hear that term, you just ignore it. There can be no such thing. Anarchy means no state, no rulers. Remember, government is gubernare, the control of the mind, the control of consciousness. So if we look at the Thomas Paine, so the founding fathers of America, most of them, if not all of them, were Freemasons. And this is where they get, I'm sure this is where they get the view of libertarianism from, the minimal role of government. Now, Thomas Paine, strong government, weak society, strong government. That government is seen as anti-society, something anti-social. And it was the fourth president after James Madison said that because no man is an angel, government is necessary. Government is necessary. And then, Thomas Paine believed that the role of government should be minimal. And it should be concentrated to enforcement to protect people against the vices, the vices of other people. And the whole idea of Thomas Paine's philosophy is that Europe has failed. It's failed because of the intense government, the intense authority, if you like, whatever it is. And the whole idea of the American Revolution is, if we could start again, if only we could start again. Now, over on the so-called far right, then, you would have just two figures, modern day figures off the top of my head from the internet, would be Mark Passio from whatonearthishappening.com. That's a statement, not a question. He believes that the founding fathers of America made a mistake by allowing a certain degree of state to be present at the revolution, and then obviously it multiplies because nobody's taking responsibility or whatever. And so the state has to take responsibility. So it grows into this sort of huge, great state monster, which America is today, of course. And then you would have, I just want to mention this, that the concept of free speech and liberty is very much a part of libertarianism. And remember that the First Amendment of free speech wasn't added till 1789, and the Second Amendment, 1791, which was the right to bear arms, own and bear arms, is not till 1791. That's strange because that's a few years after the Revolution. Now, and then Stefan Molyneux is another character that believes in zero government, absolutely zero government. Now, if I talk about, government is slavery, if I talk about Ayn Rand, now, I don't know whether Ayn Rand believed in a minimal role of government, I don't know, but she comes from the most intensive communist, state-orientated regime ever known to humankind, and that's Stalin's Russia, Stalin's Soviet Union. And then she goes to New York because she sees it as the absolute epitome, the catalyst of ingenuity, human ingenuity. And she thinks that human ingenuity is left best untouched by the state. And she wrote a book called Atlas Shrugged, and it's about a man called Taggart, who invents a type of steel that where trains can run more efficiently, faster and more efficiently. And she's not at all being altruistic. It's not about safety, and it's not about the environment, of course. It's about human progression. And then what happens is that the state, both hidden and known, tried to suppress Taggart and his new invention. How dare you progress our country, our nation, our state? That's our job, and we'll do it in our own time and our own way. We've got our own agenda for it. And there's a kind of similar theme in Fountainhead. And it was, and also, Ayn Rand sees herself as a capitalist. She thinks capitalism is good, altruism is bad, and selfishness is good. If everybody was truly selfish, everything would just work out. I'm not saying I agree with her at all. And so, what the left has in common is very sensorial, high taxes, very state-orientated, socialist ideas, and very against capitalism. And then on the right, which is what fascism was, and fascism is seen as right-wing. And then people also see capitalism as right-wing, which is probably true. But on the left, on the right here, libertarianism, there would be mixed views about capitalism. Remember, Noam Chomsky said that capitalism capitalism is such an inherently destructive system that nowhere in the world will you find, and he described himself as a libertarian, nowhere will you find pure capitalism because it would just destruct. The society would destruct. It would destruct the society. And so wherever you see capitalism, you'll see state control of it. And it will be some kind of socialist state control. And that's what keeps capitalism going. It's this like pain-killing drug that goes along with it. So now I come to the far right. And you try to fit those accused of being on the far right into this paradigm, into this spectrum, and it just doesn't go. And it makes sense. It makes sense to have statism and socialism on the left, and then libertarianism and no state and anarchy on the right. with all its complexities and all its dimensions. And so, the most famous, well, let's talk about the rioters in Stockport, Southport, and across the country. If you stop them and ask them, what are your political views, do you think that they would be far right? Would they have any political views? I don't know. I think most of them, I'm talking about the demonstrators, the protesters, the whole thing. Would you, those labelled as far right, if you ask them about, most of them were probably like old Dennis Skinner types, Corbyn has let us down. Tony Benn types, perhaps even, how the MP Dennis Skinner was seen as this kind of very much a hero figure of the left wing, always standing up for the oppressed masses and stuff like that, and things like that. If you were to ask them, what sometimes it's best to find people's political views without mentioning names. What's your view on education? Do you think we should have free education? Do you think you should pay for it? Then you can find out. Most people, I'm sure, would be in favour of free education and free healthcare. So then let's go to Tommy Robinson, who's probably the most well-known far-right figure, so-called, and the leader of the EDL. For example, I know for a fact that he's not against immigration or migration per se. His mother is. I believe his mother is a migrant from the Republic of Ireland. But do you think he fits? Do you think he's a libertarian? Do you think that he believes in the zero government? I doubt it. I'm sure he's believes in some kind of state control. And they do this, all their former EDL leader. Now, on the front cover of this paper, and it's got a big I on it, the letter I only ever see the cover, and it always has a sort of left-wing agenda. It's got far-right Tommy Robinson, EDL founder, and the EDL haven't existed for 10 years. That's the English Defence League. And then what he wants to do, they're saying that he wants to unite Sikhs, Hindus and Jewish people and Christians or whatever against Islam to create, more Islamophobia. And then it's got far right. And it's a term which I believe is used to marginalise and demonise people who have undesirable opinions. Or maybe their behaviour to a certain degree is undesirable. I don't know. Now, I remember once I had there was a guy who outside Bristol City Council. There was going to be an anti-Tommy Robinson protest, and there was a sticker there, a poster there. And it said, something like, close Tommy Robinson down, shut him up. The far right fascist, blah, blah, blah. And it was really over the top. So I just questioned this one guy. And I'm not going to say he was Antifa and he wasn't hooded and he was, his face was shown and stuff like that. So I just sort of questioned him. And it started off a nice conversation. This is what happens when you question these people. Their energy changes once you start asking questions. Like, why is Tommy Robinson far right? And of course, I'm no supporter of Tommy Robinson. I really am. I really am not. It's like, I know what he stands against, but I don't know what he stands for. He's like a protest candidate, like Trump. We know what you stand against, but what do you stand for? And I sort of said, what do you mean by far right? And why is he a fascist? And what is far right to you? And there's kind of no answer. Like, what is fascism? And every time you ask these people who ban this word around, you get the same, well, it's dictatorial, it's dictatorial and we'll shut you up and blah, blah, blah. And then there's nothing else. Like, fascism is centralised. It's allowing those ordained to rule. It's militaristic, minimal or no democracy. They're the planks of, if that's the right word, of fascism. Much easier to define than communism. The complexity is like, what was the idea of Mussolini dropping socialism and employing fascism as a clean sweep? Was it just a short-term measure to eventually employ some kind of national socialism? But I'm just talking about the way the word is just bandied around, and it means very little. And shame on those who use this term, because what they're usually referring to is some kind of national. They use the word far right, and they're referring to some kind of neo-Nazi, anti-Semitic neo-Nazi or something like that. We know that the alt-right are very, very divided with their views on Zionism. Israel and Zionism is the great divide of the alt-right, the alternative right. Alt-right, alternative right, is less of a meaningless term. It is quite meaningless, but it's less of a meaningless term than far right. It's just simply a term to marginalise a certain group of people that they regard to be undesirable. And it doesn't refer to any political view, as far as I can see. And we all believe in a certain degree of censorship. I think if you were able to question people in a certain way so that you could find out, and it depends what day it is, it depends what the news has been that week or whatever, you'll find most people will agree with a certain type of censorship, to protect children or to protect vulnerable minds or to protect society somehow. And remember that free speech in the First Amendment is very vague. It's very short and to the point, as is the rights, the Second Amendment as well. It's just the right to bear arms, own and bear arms, no standing armies within your midst, protecting the borders. It's funny that it says protecting the borders with well-armed, well-trained militias. I'm guessing it's something like that, meaning it can't be done by the state, and it shouldn't be done by the state. No standing armies in your midst. And so there ends my talk on the far right, a meaningless term in the context of my view of the political spectrum, the continuum, from left to right. And thank you very much for joining me.